Hello and welcome. This is Business Edge on News Central. I am Tolulope, Adeleru-Balogun. Today we're focusing on Africa's most mechanized economy for our first conversation, and that is of course South Africa, which is on its way out of a recession. We will be doing a deep dive into some issues hindering business growth in the Rainbow Nation. We'll also come back to Nigeria, our base, where we look at what's happening with the Central Bank of Nigeria and microfinance banks. So stick around. These are our headline stories. Three hard truths of 2020 hindering South Africa's redemption and recovery. And Nigeria's central bank revokes operating licenses of 42 microfinance banks. We'll also touch base with a few stories we're keeping our eyes on NC4 to watch before we finish the show. Welcome to Business Edge. Now, the short-term and long-term effects of the COVID-19 virus are known and are still being calculated for every nation of the world, and particularly on the African continent. But more focus here will be given to South Africa because of a few things that make it different. Now, according to The Economist, South Africa is the continent's most developed industrial economy. It sold services worth more than $16 billion to the world in 2017 against $10 billion worth of car exports that same year. Some 40,000 people are employed in South Africa doing back office work, mostly for foreign companies. But in recent years, it has been plagued by rising unemployment and worsening economic downturn that the lockdown imposed in the first quarter unfortunately further crippled its growth prospects. But grow it did. And for this growth to be sustained, more effort needs to be added to sustain the momentum of its recent recovery figures. The midterm budget estimates of Finance Minister Tito Mboweni shows an active effort of stimulus for farmers and small and medium enterprises. The South African government's cutting back of wanton bailouts of ministries, agencies, and departments and insisting on accountability will work for the best in the long run. But there are issues that may just not look financial that are affecting South Africa. Now, I have joining me business analyst, chief executive officer of the Hatch Institute as well. And he has, of course, done one or two things with Harvard Business School. I have joining me Ian Fuhr, all the way from South Africa. Ian, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi. Thank you very much for having me.
All right. So I think I would call it an article, but you released something recently where you talked about the hard truths for 2020, particularly as it has to deal with South Africa. And you used this opportunity in what you wrote to basically talk about the things that you believe were holding back South Africans. Now, one of which is the paradigm paralysis, which you said makes people stick to a mindset even when it's not bringing about positive change. So let's quickly get into that before we get into some other issues. Expand a bit on this paradigm paralysis that you mentioned.
Okay, so the paradigm paralysis is a result of 300 years of systemic racism in South Africa, which has created certain mindsets of superiority and inferiority amongst the various race groups. And as a result, a lot of people are completely stuck in their beliefs. They cannot see the need for change. And what has happened in South Africa during this year is that the extent of the inequalities between the haves and the have-nots in this country has been highlighted. And so that is a real problem. So we need to create more paradigm flexibility. In other words, the ability to see the need for change. A lot of people are stuck in their beliefs, and we have to try and shift those mindsets one person at a time, because the government is not doing much to help us at the moment. So we got to do that ourselves.
So racism, as we know, is a big issue. And unfortunately, there is a history in South Africa with apartheid, and it can affect growth and also give undue advantage to some others, which leads to unequal growth. It also leads to what the World Bank says is the most economically unequal country in the world. that is South Africa. So where do you think racism plays a part in, unfortunately, presenting an unequal economic society to South Africans?
Okay, well, if you look at the apartheid history just very briefly, you would see that it was a socially engineered system to create wealth for the white people and essentially to eliminate black people from the economy and just have them as laborers really serving the white people. So it was a hugely destructive environment. They also removed the education of black people. They didn't really teach them maths or science during those years. So that created even further problems where the government said, you will never rise above the level of laborer, and therefore there is no need to teach you maths or science. So as a result, what we have is this hugely unequal society, and where we have racially polarized workforces. And largely speaking, the white management and the black workforce is not conducive to creating a culture which is going to deliver service and productivity. So our belief is that until such time as we create more equality, where people start to feel that they have a sense of belonging in the organization and they have a strong culture, then it will be much better for the country, and hopefully we can create equality that way.
So your history in South Africa is a storied one. Of course, you run the largest chain of beauty salons across the country. You're the CEO of the Hatch Institute. And I know you can talk about in terms of business culture and race relations and how that has impacted. So in your own experience in running your business and then, of course, in starting the Hatch Institute, what have you found to be something that is possibly an unknown that many people don't realize when it comes to how race relations are affecting businesses, their ability to grow, their ability to scale up, especially for small and medium scale enterprises, and how that has a knockdown effect on the value of South Africa's economy?
Right. So one of the businesses that I ran, which I sold recently, was a beauty salon chain called Sorbet, where we were able to open up 220 franchised beauty salons across the country, one of the largest chains in Africa, as far as I'm aware. And we created that by a different style of leadership that took into account the racially polarized society that we were living in, and understanding the impact of what was going on outside of the workplace in society, and how that was affecting the workplace and how it was affecting people and productivity. So we created an environment where people had a true sense of belonging. They felt that they were accepted and respected. They were treated fairly. There was equal treatment, and there was treatment with dignity as well. And that was the culture that we created, which then allowed us to go out there and serve our customers to the very best of our ability and to create such a successful chain across the country.
So what advice would you give the government? Because South Africa is said to be on its way out of recession, but slower growth than predicted, still the most economically unequal country, and there's high rising rates of unemployment. You have the situation with South African Airways where unions have come in and insisted that no one be laid off, but yet when you look at it, you see that it cannot continue this way. You have Eskom that is still not powering the South African economy as much as it should be, and a lot of these things are government inefficiencies. Government continue to bail out companies that have been around for such a long time. They should be making profits, as we all know, but they unfortunately are not. But they do employ some numbers. So for politicians, it's difficult to find that balance with what needs to be done sometimes with what they continue to do to keep people happy. So what advice would you have for not even just President Cyril Ramaphosa, but anybody who comes in to attempt to administer South Africa's economy?
Well, I think the biggest killer of the South African economy at the moment is corruption. The government corruption has completely been uncontrolled and devastating to the economy. So where they should have been spending money on education and development and housing and all the other things that were supposed to happen, the individual greed of certain politicians removed all the money for themselves. And that's really a tragic story, because we've lost such an enormous opportunity since democracy in 1994 to try and redress the imbalances of this country. And sadly, we have a situation where a small number of government officials have literally devastated the economy by removing all the funds that were supposed to be delivered to the people, and then to take it for themselves. So that's really been a really sad situation. And that's why I believe that business has a role to play now to uplift society. It has a role to uplift the people of the country. We can't be consumed by greed anymore. We just have to go out there, accept that they're going to need to be compromises, especially amongst the white people, and they have to go out and try and do whatever they can to redress the imbalances of the past and to create some sort of equality in business. As I said, we can't rely on government. Right now, they are not doing much for the country. But business has an opportunity to try and do something insofar as employment is concerned. And so that's where my focus has been now for some time.
Okay, so I'll take you back to how we started with your op-ed, and you listed 3 hard truths for 2020, and I'll just run through them, even though we've only been able to speak about the paradigm paralysis. So you mentioned paradigm paralysis is holding us back as a nation, and that's in reference to South Africa. You also talked about racial polarization lying at the heart of most of the problems of the country, and we've addressed that a bit. And then you said hopelessness is overwhelming and insidious. Now, I'm going to ask you, listing these issues and hard truths that need to be addressed squarely, what then do you think can be done differently in South Africa for 2021? How can South Africa work to build a better economy for all?
Right. I think the state of hopelessness has really been a dampener for us. A lot of people are losing hope in the economy right now. So the only way that we can really revive hope, in my opinion, is to change the attitudes of the people. Even if we got to do that one person at a time, and in particular the white people, they need to understand that compromise is going to be the name of the game going forward. They can't hang on to the privileges that they've had all these years and still expect the country to work. So they're going to have to give up some things, and they're going to have to accept that unless we create more equality, the future of South Africa looks very, very bleak. And I think the gap between the rich and the poor is so wide that I think ultimately the people of the country will not accept that, and it won't be sustainable, and something devastating is going to happen here as far as I can see. So we have to start shifting mindsets. We've got to start recreating hope. We have to start becoming a lot more positive. We've got to change the narrative from this negativity that is consuming us at the moment into a much more positive environment, and where we start to really all put our minds to uplifting the people of this country and to reducing that gap between the haves and the have-nots. And that's the only way that I can see us ever coming right into place.
So I'm going to ask this question because you mentioned hope a lot, and in reading the op-ed, that was basically an overarching theme in a way. So do you think that a government dealing in hope can actually get a consequence of a better economy, of more positives for the economy? Can we have either direct or indirect correlation between hope and hope building by governments and administrations and economic growth?
Yes, and I think there's a very, very strong relationship between hope and growth, because hope is the only thing that is more powerful than fear. Fear is what is devastating us at the moment. Everyone is afraid not only of COVID, but of the country's prospects, of the future of the economy, of the unemployment scenario, which is one of the highest in the world. So there's a fear that contaminates everything. And the only thing that we can do to reverse the fear is to create hope for the future. And that hope, I believe, will then inspire businesses and government to go out there and do something positive for the nation and see if we can ever become a prosperous and more equal country in the future.
So I'm just going to read out some percentages to you, and that's where we'll end this conversation. But I want to ask how you feel when you hear this. So for South Africa, the top 20% of the population in most countries holds a median of 47% of the income. But in South Africa, the top 20% of the population holds near 70% of the country's income. The remainder is mostly made up of the middle class, and collectively both the top 20% and the middle class leave less than 5% of the income for the bottom 20% of the population. When you look at how that is so disparate and so unequal and so unbalanced, what do you think South Africa could be heading towards if this issue of income inequality and economic disadvantages and advantages on one side are not squarely addressed?
Yes, I think if you ask me how I feel about that, I feel ashamed. I feel disgraced. I feel ashamed. I'm actually, I don't know what to say about that. It is so grossly unfair, but it comes from a dark place in our history. And we haven't been able to reverse that systemic racism that is so ingrained in our minds. And we haven't been able to reverse that. And that is one of the biggest failures of the country, and especially of the new government. In the last 26 years since they've been in power, the ANC has been unable to reverse that situation when they had a good opportunity to do so. And all that they've managed to do is to increase that wealth gap. So the government and the officials and their cronies and certain people in business have just got all the cream, and there's nothing left for the rest of the population, which is quite sad.
It is.
Really.
All right, Ian Fuhr, we're going to end our conversation here. Thank you so much for joining us on Business Edge. We look forward to having you back. Ian is the Chief Executive Officer of the Hatch Institute based in South Africa. Ian, thank you again.
Good. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Have a fantastic day. All right, Business Edge will return to the West African parts of the continent right after this, where the CBN and some microfinance banks have found themselves in possibly not a very easy situation. We'll have the details after this. The Nigeria Deposit Insurance Corporation disclosed that in a circular titled Notice of Closure of 42 Microfinance Banks, it said that these 42, and in the statement, this is to inform the depositors, creditors, shareholders, and the general public that the operating licenses of the underlisted 42 microfinance banks have been revoked by the Central Bank of Nigeria, effective from the 12th of November 2020. The Nigeria Deposit Insurance Corporation, the official liquidator of the banks whose licenses were recently revoked, is in the process of closing the listed banks and paying their insured depositors. The statement goes further. We therefore request that all depositors of these banks should visit the closed banks' addresses and meet NIDIC officials for the verification of their claims, commencing from Monday, the 21st of November 2020 till Thursday, the 24th of December 2020. The NDIC listed the names and the addresses of the affected microfinance banks as well. Now, joining me to quickly touch on this, I have Nasir Agbalaya, head of our business desk at News Central. First question I was going to ask, and the statement has answered it: are we going to get our money? But I'm worried now about this timeline. Just basically about 4 days, from the 21st to the 24th. And maybe it's because of Christmas, but if there are additional days, they should list them out, because some people may just be getting this information. We're not sure how far it's gone. Are the banks mandated to send emails so that people who have accounts with them will know this is happening in the process? What's going on with all of that?
Well, basically, everybody will be made aware that this is what is happening to this bank at this moment. So yes, the bank should inform their customers that yes, they are winding down operation and they have this time limit. But the CBN still bends towards the will of the people, naturally. So when there's an outcry that well, we need more days, that we cannot all go to our banks within this short notice, usually there's always an extension of maybe a week or 2 weeks. So that most likely would happen, and maybe this could go on to say early January. Because now these banks are spread across the whole nation.
Country, yes.
So it's not something that is just a particular region, and it cut across many tiers. So I don't see it happening effectively for just these 4 days. I foresee that there will be an extension, and this could happen maybe, like I said, till January.
While the statement from the NDIC doesn't list a reason, are we getting some ideas as to why these 42 microfinance banks were wrapped up by the CBN?
Well, there was an audit that the NDIC did not too long ago, and all these banks literally failed the test. And one of the major things is that how much they have, and also how much of their loans have been able to recoup back. And consider the fact that most of them also are tier 1. Those are operated at the local government levels. They are pretty small.
At the very community rural levels.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they have not been as effective as they should be. Now, there's a circular also that came out earlier this year, in April, that at that level, they need to have at least 35 million naira. That is their minimum balance. Unfortunately, not everybody has been able to do that. So that's one of the main requirements also. And I said also about the loans. Now, Central Bank has issued that all banks in the country must give out more loans. Yeah. Ensure there's more development in the economy, but also that's another issue. Not all of them are giving out these loans. Now, some give out the loans, and the loans have not been well serviced. So those issues are there. Like how well are you monitoring your customers? How well are you following up with your customers? Not all of them have been able to do it because of the financial base, because really that's a big issue. But this also is where they get the operating capital from.
Okay.
And with this, they cannot effectively employ enough manpower to do everything they need to. So basically, they're going out of business because of all this.
Interesting. I remember when the central bank came out with the circular on the loan to deposit ratio and how they're pushing more out of Nigerian banks to give out more loans and some of the consequences and the feedback of that. So we hear that what are we looking at in terms of collaboration, in terms of, what do you call it? There's a business. Thank you. It's one of those days when the words get stuck. Mergers and acquisitions of any of these banks, they're all wrapping up. So 42 will not become maybe 6, and some are able to buy into others. We're not seeing any of that.
Well, that should have happened before now.
Yeah.
Now, as these banks are closing down, other bigger banks would truly try and swoop them up.
Okay.
Whatever remains of them. But some are already merged already, but I foresee that more collaborations will happen. Bigger banks, but this is just for the structure that they have and the customer base that they already have. Because already the bigger banks already have their own microfinance units. So they just need more customers. But unfortunately for these banks, you have many fintechs also who are
stepping into that space.
Exactly. Yeah. And they are doing well. Many of them are even getting more capital.
Since I don't have to leave my house.
Exactly. It just your phone number is what you need to bank with these new companies. So this is one of the reasons that they lost out, because now there are more options for the customer. You don't need to physically be in a bank to get the money. You don't need to physically go there at all. From the app, from your phone, you can do most whatever you need to do. Buy, pay. So with this, these are older banks, because in this case now they are older. They are fairly newer ones. Now, some of them have been able to reinvent themselves and also toe the line of these fintech banks. Those ones have been able to survive, but those who have stuck to the old way of banking, unfortunately.
And this is where technology brings us. You'll find older institutions that are not adaptable or flexible. They may have to make way for technology. Nasir, thank you as always for joining me. I know we'll have you back. We'll be wrapping things up on Business Edge now. We do that with NC4 to watch. We start in South Africa, where 12 tax changes in South Africa come about post-COVID. The South African Revenue Service and National Treasury have been hard at work, using the time to refine the law in SARS's favor. The changes are aimed at closing tax loopholes and to simply give SARS and the National Prosecuting Authority more teeth. Hopefully there'll be more bite too. Next, Kenya Airways, Air France, KLM Group mutually and joint venture cooperation. They've agreed to end this venture partnership from the 1st of September 2021. The airlines had previously suspended the joint venture cooperation for the calendar year 2020, mainly due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent unpredictability of return to normalcy in operations. Kenya Airways will continue to serve serve the Europe market through its gateways of London, Paris, Amsterdam, with Rome slated for resumption from 2021. Cameroon says Boko Haram has infiltrated top business and political leaders. A Cameroonian official says he has found evidence that, as widely suspected, Boko Haram militants have been establishing close ties in Cameroonian political and business circles. The revelation came after Cameroon's military arrested a former lawmaker for allegedly supplying cattle to the Nigerian terrorist group. And finally, Shippers Council calls for suspension of demurrage over bad port access roads. The Nigerian Shippers Council has indicated a willingness to seek the suspension of demurrage charges on cargoes and other charges relating to delay in clearance of goods at the Lagos Port Complex. The Executive Secretary of the Council, Hassan Bello, attributed the call to the terrible condition of the roads, which has made it impossible for shippers to clear goods from terminals within the 3 days allowed, as well as return empty containers within 4 days. And that's it on this edition of Business Edge. Don't forget to head to our website for more business and financial news from across the continent. Follow us on social media. We are at News Central, and you can also catch up with our news and programs. Just download the News Central TV mobile app on Play Store and iOS. Until next time, I'm Tolulope, Adeleru-Balogun.